Sacramento Kings. Describe it. Sacramento Kings insider.
Stinky.
Brenden Nunes joins us. Brenden. Oh, that text line's funny. Good morning, Brenden. How are you?
Morning. I'm doing well. How are you guys?
I'm good. How are you, Jason? Fair. Brenden, we're it's a Friday. We're losing it a little bit. We need some relief pitching. I said earlier I'm just kind of running out of ways to describe this team and give something to the fans. We were 9th last year. We're probably going to be 9th this year. We got 7 games in 12 days coming up. Really 8 and 13 if you count last night. That includes Cleveland, Oklahoma City, Boston, Memphis, Milwaukee, and others. Is there a bright side you can see that I can? Is it going to get better, or what are we doing here?
Yeah, I don't know if I'm a source of optimism throughout this whole thing necessarily, but I would say that I find enjoyment in like individual storylines, even if maybe the greater picture is not the, brightest view necessarily. But I think like tapping Keegan Murray's long-term development, I think is really important for this team's future. And while they haven't always gone into the greatest rate recently, I think that he's been more aggressive as of late. Keon Ellis and Devin Carter are important for this team's future. And, still how Zach LaVine continues to grow and mesh is important for this team as well, and some of these other guys. But, part of all of their development is getting some postseason experience. And, hey, if you get a chance to do that by whether that is just the playing games or winning some playing games, then I guess that means something. But
yeah,
maybe that speaks to essentially where I'm at here because, yeah, I think it is a fairly bleak outlook, even if I think that they had been playing okay basketball before this New York and Golden State games.
And Brenden, you're talking about the individual development, and even like a guy like Zach LaVine could still develop with this group. Last night, his lack of offense as far as volume, because he was efficient, wasn't the reason they lost, because they just really couldn't stop the Warriors. But it's hard to imagine a game where you'd see Fox taking 6 shots or other prime scorers on another team getting just 6 attempts. I mean, I guess it can happen, but what do you think was the biggest reason why they just couldn't get the volume of attempts for Zach LaVine last night?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of it is Golden State being a pretty solid defense, especially since adding Jimmy Butler. But for the most part, I think we saw it even more so when Malik Monk was not there, who obviously has recently returned to the lineup. But LaVine I thought, had moments where he's trying very hard to be a playmaker out there in the way of setting up for his teammates. Obviously, the Kings don't really have a traditional point guard. I thought early in that Golden State game, as a team, they had a lot of turnovers, but Malik had 2 really early ones. Malik ends the game with 4, but Zach actually ends the game with a team-high 5 turnovers. And I think that when you have those sort of blunders, that you could maybe start to get a little bit more passive or a little bit willing to pass it to some of the other guys on the pecking order, essentially. But it's one of those, got to remain aggressive things. And I think that it could be categorized into still sort of being the new guy, and you don't want to be the new guy that's turning the ball over a bunch and chucking up shots, which, not a great excuse. And maybe there's more to it than that, but I kind of think it was just a slump game for Zach, and he's far from the only one that struggled yesterday. But his lack of playmaking, I think, is something that's notable for this team because, he shouldn't be relied upon to be the point guard for extended stretches out there.
Brenden Nunes joining us. Brenden, the Kings are effectively 3.5 games behind the Clippers for the 8th seed. They're 3.5 ahead of Phoenix going into tonight, to being out of the playoffs, the 11 seed, if you will. We asked this question earlier. I'll ask you, which is more likely? The Kings jump up to 8 or the Kings miss the playoffs? You got to pick one of two.
I would say it's more likely they jump up to 8. I think it'd be second guessing myself right after I say it. But, I think it'd be pretty tough to have to fall down. I don't think Phoenix obviously is. I think it has more to do with the team around them, right? That Phoenix has just been struggling as much as they have. and Dallas as well, obviously being part of that. I don't know. The Clippers and Timberwolves are rolling, but I'm not sure to what extent that will keep up. And again, I didn't expect this Golden State game to be a blowout in the way that it was, but I thought that they had been playing okay basketball, and I'm very much back to where I had been in years prior of they're good enough offensively to win any night and bad enough defensively to lose any given night. So I think they're going to have a chance at some of these games, even where they're not favored.
How much of an impact right now is the loss of Sabonis? I thought he might go yesterday. He worked out in the morning after practicing the day before. And he's a really important piece to this puzzle. One, do you think he goes tonight? And two, how much do you think him being out has been a factor in this struggle lately?
Yeah, I mean, 25 assists last night for the Kings on 37 made baskets. You know, that's not what you're looking for there. I think Doug is looking for more like 40 assists as a potential target. And obviously Domas is part of that. Ironically, I didn't think they were fitting great. They being Domantas Sabonis and Zach LaVine, but that's a process that obviously gets slowed when Domas goes down for a little while. So you would like to think that the guy who maybe his greatest skill is making his teammates better, that when he gets out here, it should help everything mesh. You know, a bunch of hoopers on the floor and then Domantas Sabonis trying to get everybody organized essentially. So I don't think that we've seen that be actualized, but I think that's the, theoretical way for how Domas should be able to help this team. Even though I've kind of thought that maybe needing less of attention, whether that's touches or things like that with Valanciunas, may fit in a different way that is also beneficial to this team. So I think it's definitely had an impact. You see it in terms of the ball movement, the rebounding and such, but him coming back, I certainly don't think is a fix-all for these things, and honestly probably means that there's just still more learning pains.
Brenden, much of the talk with Malik Monk is great player. Obviously, we love him, just not a true point guard. The Kings don't really have a true point guard unless you count Markelle Fultz, but a startable true point guard. It's interesting in the Monty McNair era, geez, David, that they have drafted Tyrese Halliburton. They have drafted Devin Carter. They have drafted Davion Mitchell, and they had Tyrese Halliburton. And now they have no point guard. Is that more situational to you, or is that a front office issue?
Well, I would say it's an interesting one because there's some picks that I think were not great in the moment. I wasn't a big fan of the Davion pick. I thought that one was fairly surprising, even though obviously the success that he had in college, but it being a third, he was coming in as a third point guard. You already had De'Aaron Fox. You already had Tyrese Halliburton. I think Tyrese is obviously a home run pick, but also the obvious one. And Devin Carter currently, honestly, does not look like a great pick. There's guys like Dalton Connect, Tristan Da Silva, even if you want to throw Kalel Ware in there, that could be impactful for this Kings team, but still too early to call it for the most part. But I would say that some of them don't have traditional point guard skills. Davion Mitchell, Devin Carter. I think if Davion was like a traditional point guard, that maybe his fate on this team would have been a little bit different than the conclusion that it came to. But yeah, I think that there's just weird circumstances with each one of those guys. And when you look at the situation of going from Sacramento having so many guards to all of a sudden having no point guard on their roster, I think ironically, the thing is they always had a lot of guards, but they really only had the one point guard or two if you throw Jordan McLaughlin in there.
So tonight, Brenden, it becomes such an important game really for the Kings, but also it feels like the game for the Phoenix Suns, a team that has really been struggling. Why do you think they've had such a hard time? Because when you look at their roster, it looks like they should have a lot more wins than they do.
Yeah, it sounds like things just aren't sort of clicking, and I'll admit my faults and say I thought that this team was going to be in the Western Conference Finals coming into the year. I also believed in the Clippers when they had Paul George over there for way too long. So clearly I just can't overlook the talent sometimes. But it sounds like, they haven't quite been on the same page with some coaching staff things. And I think that when Kevin Durant's name gets brought up a bunch, or obviously Bradley Beal in the first place in the Jimmy Butler trade conversations, and then Kevin Durant's name gets brought up at the trade deadline, obviously they had already kind of been sputtering at that point, but I think that makes things even more difficult. And the role players on that team really have not performed in the way that I think that you would have expected. I was a big fan of, Monte Morris and Royce O'Neal and some of these guys, and Yusuf Nurkic I thought could fill a role, and obviously that has not quite worked out for them. So that definitely plays a part when you're a super top heavy team. But I think one of the biggest things is that Devin Booker hasn't quite been the star player that everybody thought he would be, obviously coming off a great Olympic year, and they were relying on him to essentially be the point guard of this team, even though Bradley Beal, KD, some of these other guys can do that. There was a lot of reliance on Book when you're such a top heavy roster like this. And while he's had a solid year, I think up to their standard of, hopefully competing was the thought coming into the year. I don't think he's met that bar.
That's Brenden Nunes. You can read him on Twitter and, of course, at SactownSports.com. Your Sacramento Kings insider for us here on the station appears each and every Friday. Brenden, appreciate it. Enjoy the game tonight. Enjoy your weekend, my friend.
Thanks, guys. You too.
Thank you.
Yeah. It's kind of a crutch of mine. I need to quit doing that.
What?
I call everybody my friend.
Oh.
I mean, not that he's not.
Yeah.
I just feel like that's you know who does that? Hasseltine. I picked that up from, hey, my friend, how are you? Yeah, I picked
I didn't catch that. Now we'll see.
It is kind of a crutch. It's like when I randomly wink at the country people when I go in to say good morning. I say, good morning, Dave. I go, hey, how you doing? And I wink, and then I catch myself. I'm like, why am I winking?
Have they said anything?
They didn't say anything, and then I caught myself and said something, and then Cody was like, yeah, I noticed, they were laughing and making fun of me. I'm not a winker.
Apparently you are.
Why do I wink?
That's not what the people in England say.
You're not a winker.
You're
a stinker.
You're a winker. We'll take a break when we come back. Kings Suns tonight, but what's at stake?